So ready to unlock some serious creative potential with this deep dive into Rick Rubin's The Creative Act.
Absolutely.
Yes, some of these excerpts you shared really got me thinking, especially the parts about like tapping into that subconscious flow.
Yeah.
And like cultivating a more mindful approach to creativity. It's like he's saying we can all be artists, kind of.
Yeah.
In our own lives.
Absolutely. Rubin, he really like flips the script on what it means to even be an artist.
Yeah.
He argues that it's not necessarily about, mastering a specific medium. It's more about a way of being, a way of interacting with the world.
Yeah.
And so it's less about that finished product.
Right.
And more about tapping into that creative energy that exists within all of us, really.
It's funny, he uses this analogy of a peach tree bearing fruit.
Right.
Or even just a cloud releasing rain.
Yeah.
These are natural processes,
Right.
But he's seeing them as inherently creative acts, just like writing a song or painting a picture.
Exactly. And he believes we can, all tap into that universal flow of creativity.
Yeah.
And one of the ways we do that is by cultivating awareness.
Yeah.
Not just awareness of, the world around us, but also a deeper understanding of our internal landscape, right?
Right.
Our thoughts, our emotions, that constant hum of change within.
It's like expanding our perceptive palette, right?
Exactly, yeah.
He talks about immersing ourselves in great works of art, literature, even spending time in nature.
Right.
All is a way to broaden our understanding of what's even possible.
Yeah, and I love that he uses this image of the ocean as a mirror,
Oh, yeah.
reflecting our true selves back at us.
Yeah.
And it's about diving, beneath the surface, getting to know the deeper parts of ourselves, the parts where creativity often lies dormant.
Okay. But how do we actually access that deeper creative well?
Yeah.
He mentioned some like pretty intriguing practices like dream journaling immediately upon waking. I've dabbled in that, and sometimes it feels like gibberish, but other times I'm like, oh, that sparked something.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Rubin believes that those moments right after waking, when we're still in that liminal space between dreaming and waking,
Yeah.
they can be incredibly fertile ground for creativity.
Interesting.
He even suggests embracing randomness.
Okay.
Things like even using the I Ching as a way to kind of bypass our conscious mind and tap into those deeper intuitive resources.
So it's like our conscious mind can sometimes be a creativity blocker. Like we overthink.
Totally.
We censor ourselves, whereas those subconscious impulses are more raw and unexpected.
Precisely. And sometimes we need to shake things up a bit to even dislodge those blocked creative channels.
Yeah.
And so he talks about this exercise where you physically release anger. Right?
Okay.
Maybe by like beating on a pillow.
Right.
And then immediately following it with stream of consciousness writing. It's about accessing those raw, unfiltered emotions and just seeing what emerges.
That's what I call getting those creative juices flowing. He also talks a lot about the importance of our environment.
Yes.
Which I think is so key.
Absolutely.
And he contrasts artists like Andy Warhol, who thrived in the midst of noise and chaos,
Right.
with someone like Marcel Proust, who famously soundproofed his room to achieve complete silence. It makes you wonder, like, what is the ideal creative space?
That's the question Rubin wants us to ask ourselves, right?
Right.
What kind of environment best supports your creative flow?
Right.
Is it a quiet space free from distractions? Or do you need a bit of chaos and stimulation to get the ideas flowing? It's about paying attention to those subtle cues and designing a space that works with your own natural rhythms.
And what about those external pressures, the trends, the expectations?
Right.
He makes this interesting point about cultural currents, urging us to be aware of them,
Right.
but not feel beholden to them, like a connected observer,
Right.
not a slave to the zeitgeist, as he says.
It's a fine line to walk, right?
Yeah.
We don't want to be completely out of touch with the world around us, but we also don't want to let those external forces dictate our every creative decision.
Right.
It's about finding that balance between staying informed and staying true to our own vision.
One thing I always struggle with is self-doubt.
Yeah.
It can be such a creativity killer.
Totally.
And Rubin has some really insightful thoughts on navigating that inner critic.
Yeah.
He talks about the power of playfulness,
Yes.
of lowering the stakes, even embracing the imperfections that make a work unique.
He tells this great anecdote about how he used to make up words when writing songs.
Really?
And sometimes those made-up words ended up fitting better than any existing word ever could.
Wow.
Right? And it speaks to this idea of like, silencing that inner critic.
Yeah.
Allowing ourselves to play, to experiment, to make glorious mistakes.
Yeah.
Without that fear of judgment.
Speaking of mistakes, he brings up this Buddhist concept of papancha.
Right.
Which essentially means an overabundance of thoughts, right?
Yes.
He's basically saying that when we're stuck in a spiral of self-doubt, those negative thoughts can become overwhelming and paralyzing.
And that's where Rubin's advice becomes so practical, I think.
Yeah.
He suggests shifting our focus from those vague feelings of I'm not good enough to specific aspects of our work.
Oh, interesting.
Right. So instead of getting bogged down in this vortex of self-doubt, ask yourself, what's one small thing I can improve about this paragraph, this chord progression,
Right.
this brushstroke?
So it's about reframing that negative self-talk
Yes.
into a more productive internal dialogue.
Exactly.
Focusing on tangible improvements rather than those unproductive thought loops. So much of creativity is about perspective, isn't it?
Absolutely. And one way to shift our perspective is through collaboration.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Rubin believes that working with others can help us break free from our own limited thinking and unlock new creative possibilities.
It reminds me of that story he tells about AlphaGo,
Yes.
the AI that beat the world champion Go player
Yes.
by making this completely unconventional move.
And the reason AlphaGo could make that move,
Why?
it wasn't bound by centuries of, human tradition and these preconceived notions about how the game should be played.
Right.
It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the most innovative ideas come from a place of not knowing.
It's like what he says about the Ramones.
Yes.
They practically invented punk rock through innovation, through ignorance.
Yes.
Because they didn't know the rules, they broke them.
They did.
And in the process, they created something totally new and groundbreaking.
It's a great example of how not knowing can be a powerful, creative force.
Totally.
But of course, that doesn't mean we should just throw out all knowledge and experience.
Right, of course.
It's about finding that sweet spot between honoring what we know and being open to what we don't.
Right.
And that's where, honing our craft comes in. He tells this fantastic story about John Wooden,
Okay.
the legendary basketball coach. Are you familiar with him at all?
Yes. He won all those championships with UCLA, right?
Yes, he did. He won 10 NCAA championships.
Wow, that's amazing.
But guess what he focused on during his very first practice with his team?
What?
Teaching his players how to properly tie their shoes.
Oh, wait.
Yes.
Wow.
Teaching them to tie their shoes. I mean, you'd think he'd be like diving right into complex plays,
Right. It seems so obvious. Like, why would you even spend time on that?
Yeah.
But Rubin uses this to highlight Wooden's deep understanding of discipline.
Okay.
And the importance of mastering even the smallest details. Wooden knew that if his players couldn't even tie their shoes correctly, how could they be trusted to execute a complex play under pressure?
It speaks to this idea of building that solid foundation, right?
Right.
That mastery isn't just about those grand gestures,
Right, exactly.
It's about those small, consistent actions.
Exactly. And Rubin ties this into the concept of adaptation.
What?
He argues that consistent practice, focusing on those fundamentals, actually changes us, right?
Right.
We develop this almost unconscious mastery
Right.
where things just flow effortlessly.
It's like learning to ride a bike.
Right? Exactly.
At first it's all wobbly and awkward, and then all of a sudden it just clicks.
It just clicks, and then you're like, how was I ever not doing this?
Exactly. It's about bridging that gap, between that conscious effort and then that unconscious competence.
Right.
He also talks about translation,
Right.
which I think is such a crucial aspect of the creative process.
Okay.
It's about refining our skills, mastering our chosen medium, so that we can effectively communicate the essence of our ideas.
So it's not enough to just have a great idea. You got to be able to translate it.
We have to have the skills
Yeah.
to kind of bring it forth. Yeah.
To bring it forth. It reminds me of something I was doing, years ago now. I was learning to play guitar, and I was struggling to play this one particular chord progression.
Right.
And I was getting so frustrated.
Yeah.
And a musician friend of mine gave me this really simple piece of advice. He said, focus on the transitions between the chords.
Interesting. And did that small shift in focus make a difference?
Huge.
Should it
Once
be?
I stopped focusing on like nailing each individual chord and instead I was focusing on this smooth transition between them, my playing just got so much better. Like a light bulb went off.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, it really was.
That's a perfect example of translation in action, you know?
Right.
You were refining your technique, right?
Right.
In order to better express that musical idea that you had in your head.
It's so true. And sometimes that expression can change dramatically depending on the context, which is another fascinating aspect of creativity that Rubin explores.
Yeah.
He uses the, those Brillo boxes by Andy Warhol?
Right.
Prime example, in a grocery store, just ordinary objects, but you put them in a museum
Right.
and suddenly they're high art.
It completely changes how we perceive them.
Totally.
It reminds us that meaning isn't like inherent in the object itself,
Right.
but it's also in how it's presented
Right.
and that context surrounding it.
Totally. Yeah, totally. And he also talks about the importance of sequencing, like how the order of songs on an album can totally change how we experience each track.
It's about understanding that flow of energy, you know?
Yeah.
The way that the different elements interact to create this like cohesive whole,
It's so true.
you know? He even compares it to the captivating force of love.
Okay, I gotta ask, how does love relate to the order of songs on an album?
Well, think about how a great album like takes you on a journey. You know, there's highs, there's lows, there's moments of intensity, there's moments of reflection. It's not just a random collection of songs, right?
Right.
It's this like carefully curated experience that's designed to evoke, certain emotions in us.
And that curation, that attention to detail
Yes.
creates a certain energy that just draws us in.
Yes.
It's just like a great love story.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Rubin says we should pay attention to this energy as a guide, almost like a voltmeter for creative potential.
A voltmeter. Okay, I like that.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, how much energy does this have?
Exactly.
Does it need more?
And it's just, it can ebb and flow, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that's an important point, too.
Right.
You know, it's recognizing when a work, or even when we ourselves have nothing left to give at that moment.
Right.
It's okay to step back, recharge, come back with fresh eyes.
He delves into these fascinating stories, about legendary artists, right?
Yep.
How they toiled away in obscurity, struggling to bring their masterpieces into the world. But then he throws us this curveball.
Oh, tell me more about this. I'm intrigued.
He calls them apocrypha, suggesting that these stories we hear about, Van Gogh only selling one painting in his lifetime, or Mozart dying penniless.
Right.
He's like, they're often exaggerated or even completely made up.
No way. Are you serious?
Yeah.
I've always found those stories so inspiring, though.
Right.
But also kind of intimidating.
Right.
Like, oh, I guess I have to suffer for my art to be worthwhile.
Yeah. And he's saying that's exactly the trap he wants us to avoid.
Okay.
He says these like romanticized narratives can actually hold us back.
Interesting.
We start believing that creative suffering is a prerequisite for greatness.
Right.
And that's just, it's simply not true.
So it's about letting go of those preconceived notions, those kind of idealized versions of what the creative process should look like.
Right. And focusing on our own unique path.
It's about tuning out those undermining voices, right?
Yeah.
Those internal and external forces that can just sabotage our creative flow.
Totally. It's like that self-doubt, that pressure to succeed, even just criticism from others. The voices can be really loud.
Oh, yeah. So loud. So what does Rubin suggest we do about those?
Yeah.
Like, how do we quiet them down?
Well, he has this great line where he says, creativity is the ability to withstand the gap between the vision and the reality.
Ooh, I like that.
It's good, right? And it's about recognizing that those undermining voices, they're always going to be there,
Right.
But we don't have to give them power over us,
Right. We have a choice.
We have a choice.
We can listen to that one or that one over there.
Exactly.
That's so true.
Yeah.
It's about choosing to focus on the vision.
Yeah, on the work itself, rather than getting bogged down by those negative voices. But he also talks about, literally changing our environment to shake things up. He's got all these little things. He's like, turn off the lights, hold the microphone differently, hang upside down while you're singing. Like, I don't know, whatever works.
Yeah, it's about disrupting those habitual patterns.
Yeah.
Forcing ourselves to see things from a new perspective.
It's so true. It's so true.
Yeah. And he encourages us to get playful with it, to change the stakes a little bit.
Okay.
He suggests like imagining that it's the last time you'll ever perform a song,
Yes.
or pretending you're creating something for your favorite artist.
Right. I love that.
Right.
It's like shifting your mindset to unlock these like different levels of creativity.
Totally.
And it reminds us that our perception shapes our reality, right?
Yeah.
How we choose to frame our creative experiences can have a profound impact on the work itself.
Absolutely. And speaking of reframing, Rubin talks about how, our bodies, our minds, they adapt, through consistent practice.
Right.
Right. Think about it like weightlifting.
You break down the muscle fibers to build them back stronger.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that same principle applies to our creative practice.
That's interesting.
Right. We push ourselves and then we rest.
Right.
And it's in that recovery period, right?
Right.
That our skills deepen and integrate.
So it's not just about learning new skills. It's also about developing this like unconscious mastery.
Yes.
Where things become intuitive.
Yes.
Effortless.
And it's like, it's like that feeling when you're so engrossed in your work, that time seems to disappear. It's just you and the flow.
You're in the flow.
You're in the flow.
Yeah.
And Rubin reminds us that flow state isn't something that just happens to us. It's something we cultivate.
Okay.
It's through that consistent practice and that willingness to show up for the work.
Yeah.
Even when we don't feel like it.
Yeah. He also talks about, translation.
Yes.
That ability to accurately communicate our ideas, right?
Yeah.
Through the language of our craft.
Yes.
Which could be different for you than for me.
Of course, of course.
Like we have different...
Every craft has its own unique language.
Right.
Its own set of rules and conventions. And so translation is about becoming fluent in that language, really.
Right.
Mastering the nuances of your chosen medium so that you can effectively express, your unique perspective.
Yeah. Sometimes I get so caught up in trying to be, like, original that I forget about the importance of, like, mastering the fundamentals.
It's a common trap, I think.
Right.
But, Rubin reminds us that even the most, like, groundbreaking artists, they build upon the work of those who came before them.
Yeah, right, of course.
We're not reinventing the wheel every time.
And that's where context comes in, right? He uses the Brillo boxes by Andy Warhol to illustrate how context can just drastically change the meaning and the impact of a work.
Right. There's a powerful reminder that meaning isn't kind of just inherent in the work itself.
Right.
Right. It's also in how it's presented and perceived.
Yeah.
Yeah. The same piece can evoke such vastly different responses, depending on its surroundings, the cultural moment, even the individual, experiencing it.
We were just talking about energy earlier, right?
Yes.
How a great album can like take you on a journey.
Right.
Well, he says that same principle applies to all forms of art.
It does.
He encourages us to really pay attention to the energy of a work.
Yeah.
To notice like what draws us in.
Yes.
What makes it feel alive and vibrant.
And to also recognize when that energy starts to fade a little bit.
Right.
Yeah. When a work or even we ourselves have nothing left to give in that moment.
Right, exactly.
It's about being honest with ourselves about that.
Yeah.
And knowing when to step back.
Yeah.
Recharge and then come back with those fresh eyes.
He also has this amazing story about AlphaGo, right?
Yeah.
The AI that beat the world champion Go player.
Yeah. That's such a classic example of how not knowing can actually be a powerful source of creativity.
Yeah, I love that story.
Yeah, me too. Because, AlphaGo wasn't bound by centuries of tradition and this, conventional thinking, right?
Right.
So it could see possibilities that humans, with all of our preconceptions, missed.
It's like what he says about the Ramones.
Right.
He practically invented punk rock through innovation, through ignorance.
They did, because they didn't know what they should be doing.
That's right.
They created something totally new.
Amazing. It's a great reminder, that sometimes the most innovative ideas, they come from these unexpected places.
They do. They really do.
You just got to be open to them.
Yeah. But of course, not knowing isn't enough.
Right.
We still need to hone our craft.
Right.
Develop the skills and discipline to bring those ideas to life in the world.
Which brings us back to that story of John Wooden teaching his players how to tie their shoes.
Right. It might seem like this mundane detail, but
Right.
but it speaks to this, Wooden's deep understanding of the fundamentals, right?
Right.
He knew that mastery isn't just about those grand gestures, but it's about the accumulation of those small, consistent actions over time.
It's like focus on the details.
Yeah.
Hone your craft.
Yeah.
So that when those moments of inspiration strike, you're ready.
You're ready, yeah.
You can translate them into something amazing.
It's also important to remember that those moments of inspiration can be fleeting,
Oh, yeah.
And so, Rubin emphasizes the importance of capturing them as they come.
Okay.
Whether that's, through a voice memo or a quick scribble on a napkin.
Get it down.
Exactly. And he also stresses the importance of completion, that often messy final stage,
Yeah.
where we have to wrestle those creations into their finished forms.
Right. That can be tough.
It can be challenging. It requires a different set of skills, right?
It does. Totally does.
Discipline, discernment, a willingness to let go of elements that aren't serving the work as a whole.
So we've talked about awareness. We've talked about, tapping into our subconscious.
Right.
Finding our flow, dealing with self-doubt. What other, nuggets of wisdom does Rubin offer?
Well, he talks about this feeling that he calls the ecstatic.
Okay.
And these are those moments of pure joy and creative flow, that signal that we're on the right track.
Okay.
It's that feeling of being completely absorbed in the moment.
Yeah.
Where time kind of seems to disappear.
Right.
And everything just clicks.
So how do we get there?
Right.
Is it something you can, cultivate?
Yeah.
Or is it more about just being open to it when it arises? So is the ecstatic something you can, chase after?
Yeah.
Or is it more about, creating the right conditions and then surrendering to the process?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
Rubin seems to suggest it's a bit of both.
Okay.
He says that we can cultivate the ecstatic by practicing mindfulness.
Okay.
By paying attention to those subtle shifts in our energy and our surroundings. But he also emphasizes the importance of surrender.
Yeah.
Of letting go of our need for control.
Right.
And allowing that creative process to kind of unfold organically.
So it's about finding that balance between effort and surrender.
Yes.
Between conscious intention and subconscious flow.
Yeah.
Which makes sense because creativity itself is this dance between those two things.
Exactly. And he reminds us that the journey is just as important as the destination.
Yeah.
Those moments of the ecstatic, they're incredible.
Right.
But they're often fleeting.
Okay.
The real magic happens in the process.
Right.
In the day-to-day practice of showing up.
Right.
Creating, even when we don't really feel like it,
I think that's something a lot of artists especially,
Yeah.
struggle with.
Yeah.
That pressure to constantly be on.
Right.
To be churning out these masterpieces.
Right. Well, Rubin has some really reassuring words for that, actually.
Okay.
He says, the universe never explains why.
Yeah.
He's acknowledging that inherent mystery of the creative process,
Yeah.
We can't always control when or how inspiration will strike.
Right.
And that's okay. Sometimes the best thing we could do is just create this space for it.
And trust.
And trust that it will emerge. Trust that creative impulse is always there.
Yeah.
Humming beneath the surface.
Right.
Even when we don't feel it.
Yeah.
And when we do tap into those moments of the ecstatic, right?
Yeah.
When we create something that truly resonates with our soul.
Right.
It's magic.
It's like we're tapping into something larger than ourselves.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
And Rubin reminds us that our individual creative acts,
Yeah.
right, they're all part of something much grander.
Okay.
Something he calls the universal chorus.
I like that.
It's this beautiful idea that every song ever written, every painting ever painted, every story ever told, it's all interconnected,
Wow.
contributing to this collective tapestry of human experience.
It's humbling, isn't it?
It is.
To think that our little creative things are part of this much bigger
Yeah.
expression.
It is. And it's a powerful reminder of the purpose and potential of art.
Yeah.
To move people, to inspire change, to connect us across time and space.
And to think it all starts with that spark of awareness.
Yes.
That willingness to tap into that creative energy
Yeah.
that exists within all of us. So, as we're kind of wrapping up our deep dive here
Yes.
into Rick Rubin's The Creative Act.
Yes.
What are some key takeaways that you think our listeners can kind of,
Yeah.
take away and apply to their own lives?
Well, I think Rubin would encourage us to approach our creativity, not just as this, hobby or profession,
Right.
but as a way of being in the world.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Cultivate that awareness, embrace experimentation,
Yeah.
find joy in the process,
Right.
and trust that the universe will provide the rest.
And to remember that we are all artists, right?
We are.
Regardless of our chosen medium.
Right.
Whether we're writing a symphony or designing a website or even just
Yeah, or cooking a meal.
cooking a meal.
It's all creative.
We all have that power to tap into that,
We do.
to bring something beautiful into the world.
It's about silencing those inner critics,
Yes.
embracing our imperfections, creating from a place of authenticity
Yes.
and joy.
Mm-hmm.
And the why of it all
Yeah.
might always remain a mystery.
Right.
But as Rubin reminds us, the magic lives in the wonder of what we do not know.
I love that. What a beautiful way to kind of end our little deep dive here.
Yes.
Thanks so much for joining me today.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah.
Until next time.
Yeah. Take care.
You too.